Right. Stuart, we've got a good number. We've got 30 on. I'll just admit one more. And we should be able to kick off.
That's great. That'd be a pleasure.
Super. Okay, right. I hope you can all hear me. Thank you very much all for joining this evening. We're delighted to host this evening in collaboration with Stuart Macpherson, a conservationist who FOTPOP worked very closely with. We've got a really exciting evening ahead of us with an exclusive premiere of our new book and DVD, Britain's Distant Overseas. As usual, you will have the chance to, as I said, post questions in the chat bar in the right top hand corner. We hope to get round to that later in the evening. And we'll also aim to put as many questions forward to Stuart as possible within the interest of time. You'll also have the chance to view our merchandise at the end of the evening as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Stuart.
Okay. It's a pleasure to speak to you. I'll just share my screen, which I think should be, there we go. Okay, perfect. Can you guys see my screen?
We can indeed.
Can you see if I go into slide, can you see that okay now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Beautiful. Okay. All righty. Well, if everyone's okay, I'll just give a quick 5 or 10 minute overview to put this in context, and then we've got a 30-minute film, and then any questions and answers. So it's an absolute pleasure to speak to you all tonight. Thank you so much for joining this event. So tonight this talk is about the UK Overseas Territories marine wildlife, our distant seas. So as I'm sure everyone knows, there's, well, technically 14 overseas territories, but kind of 16 because Ascension, St. Helena and Tristan da Cunha are so geographically and biogeographically separate, but politically there's 14. Just to recap so everyone is across them all, there's politically, this is all one territory in the South Atlantic, Ascension Island, St. Helena and Tristan da Cunha. Then in the South Atlantic / Southern Ocean, there's the Falklands, the South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands, and a slice of Antarctica, which is the British Antarctic Territory. Then way out in the middle of the Indian Ocean, there's the beautiful British Indian Ocean Territory, also known as the Chagos Archipelago. Then in the middle of the Pacific, there's 4 islands that make up the Pitcairn Islands. Then in the Caribbean and North Atlantic, there's 6, which is Bermuda, Anguilla, Montserrat, the British Virgin Islands, Turks and Caicos Islands, and the Cayman Islands. And last but by no means least, beautiful Gibraltar and Akrotiri and Dhekelia, which are the sovereign base areas in the Mediterranean. So my talk, as always, can only ever be a tiny tip of the iceberg kind of overview, but hopefully this gives a bit of a flavour nonetheless. The territories are amazing. They're a very underappreciated side of the UK, which deserve to be loved and treasured as the brightest jewels of the UK. On land, they have every single thing from tropical rainforests to deserts to Antarctic icy wastelands and every other major habitat, terrestrial habitat on Earth, literally every major biome. It's incredible, the diversity when you go across them all. If you put them all together, including the Antarctic Territory, they're 7 times the size of the British Isles. They have well over 20 times the biodiversity. No one knows exactly how many because new species continue to be found every single year, but well over 20 times the biodiversity of the British Isles. And they're disproportionately important. Many of them are relatively small islands or archipelagos or peninsulas, but they have very, very high numbers of endemism, at least, and this probably has been surpassed now, but well over 1,000 species that occur nowhere else on Earth. And to add to their importance, many of them are key breeding sites. So again, even though they're tiny pinpricks of land in some cases, they can often be important for wildlife spanning entire hemispheres. And that's absolutely no exaggeration. Many of them, yeah, have seabird or marine, for example, marine turtle populations that span thousands upon thousands upon thousands of kilometers. So they're extremely important, despite some of them being relatively small. And to add to it, as remote islands across the world, they often drive evolution in weird and wonderful ways. So that's some of the credentials, but you've heard all that before. What this talk tonight is all about is the underwater diversity of the overseas territories. And this is something that's been very, very much overlooked, including, I have to say, I totally overlooked it when I went to them all and filmed them all for a BBC series and a big fat book I wrote on them. I did relatively little underwater. We only dived at, I think, 3 of them. So this year, my project has been about showcasing the amazing underwater heritage and underwater diversity, because believe it or not, the overseas territories grant the UK the 5th largest ocean estate of all countries on Earth, and the 12th largest area of coral reefs. The reason for this is that each territory, each island, has an exclusive economic zone around each island. And because the territories, even though many of them consist of very small islands, they're scattered across vast, vast, vast areas. So actually have enormous areas of water. And that's incredibly diverse. They just like on land, cover every single major marine biome on Earth, from coral reefs, beautiful exquisite corals and coral gardens and anemones and tropical waters, to deep sea hot black smoke vents and geothermal vents, to mangrove, beautiful mangrove waters, mangrove forests and estuarine waters, which are incredibly important for biodiversity and reproduction of many, many animals, to stunning kelp forests, absolutely breathtaking kelp forests in the South Atlantic. And of course, vast swathes of waters underneath the sea ice of Antarctica, which is, by the way, incredibly important, as you'll hear in the film that you're about to see. So they really are incredibly diverse. In fact, even to some extent, you could possibly argue, even more biodiverse, biologically rich, and biologically varied underwater than on land. And they have some pretty amazing credentials, including here in the British Indian Ocean Territory. It's the least polluted seawater anywhere on Earth, including Antarctica, the waters of Antarctica, and some of the greatest water clarity recorded anywhere on the planet. So some really, really impressive credentials. We often think, when we talk about marine life, we often think about fish or marine invertebrates. And of course, that's an extremely important part of marine biodiversity. And there are many, many endemic species. For example, the Chagos anemone fish, or this Chagos brain coral that occurs nowhere else on Earth. But you've got to remember, marine life, or at least the marine biome, isn't just what's underwater. People often forget, and this is especially important on remote islands. Lots of the wildlife on land is absolutely intimately connected to the marine biodiversity underwater and is actually included in that biome. For example, seabirds. Many of the territories are incredibly important breeding sites for tens and tens and tens of millions of seabirds. This can be from tropical frigate birds on Ascension and the Caribbean territories, and to some extent other territories as well, all the way to the waters of the South Atlantic and the Southern Ocean, with some of the world's largest colonies of penguins. This is on South Georgia. This one colony alone has, I think, over 250,000 pairs of king penguins. So, 500,000 birds plus their young. So just vast, vast, vast numbers. And the world's largest colonies of albatrosses. This is on the Falkland Islands. So you might think, oh, well, these animals live on land. Yes, that's true, but their entire food chain, everything they eat and depend upon, is in the sea. So they absolutely are part of that biome and are absolutely intimately connected to the waters around the territories, to some extent more than, well, much more so than the terrestrial life on those islands. Of course, many of the territories, being remote islands in the tropics, many of them are home to really large colonies of land crabs. And we often think of crabs only occur in the water. And this is another example. These animals couldn't exist without their marine connection. They have to reproduce in the waters, and their larvae have a very important part of their life in the salt water. And again, they couldn't survive without that. So they're intimately linked to the marine biome as well, and a part of that ecosystem, very much part of that ecosystem as well. And these are on Ascension Island. They have vast migrations there. But of course, on the Chagos Archipelago, the British Indian Ocean Territory, you have the largest terrestrial invertebrates of all, the giant coconut crabs or robber crabs, which are really impressive and amazing. And perhaps most clearly of all, we have an exact opposite to the land crabs in the marine reptiles, the sea turtles that come on shore. Whereas the land crabs rear their young in the water, the turtles have to lay their eggs on land. So it's an exact opposite of the land crabs. And again, absolutely, this is part of the marine ecosystem, even though they overlap on land as well. So I just wanted to put that in context, because we often think only of fish or invertebrates such as lobsters or crabs or mollusks and the like as part of the marine ecosystem, but it's much more complicated with that. And there are these overlaps with the terrestrial wildlife as well. So just wanted to quickly put that in context. Well, just before we start the film, I just wanted to thank everyone. I believe there's some wonderful people who have very kindly been so kind as to contribute footage and materials for the books and the DVD and the film you're about to watch. This book and DVD was absolutely a collaborative effort. It was kind of like a giant, both of them were like a giant jigsaw puzzle, because I needed to find literally hundreds of people with expertise in different areas all across the overseas territories, looking at their different areas of research. And they very, very kindly contributed photos, text, video, and so many other bits. And I'm genuinely not just saying this, but there's not a chance on earth this would have been possible without the very kind contributions from so many people. And I mean, literally so many people from across the overseas territories. So I just want to say a really sincere thank you to everyone who so kindly has contributed. And it's made this project, the book, the film you're about to watch, and the DVD, hopefully present a really detailed overview of the marine life, which again really hasn't been covered, at least as a subject covering all of the territories. It's hardly been covered at all, really. And there's been some really exciting new discoveries. So this shot here is in the South Sandwich Islands, and just a couple of years ago, an entire lava lake was discovered on the tops of one of these islands. There's only 8. This is the 8th in the entire world. So there's only 7 others on the planet. And one of them, just literally 2 years ago, was discovered in the South Sandwich Islands. And through the incredible work of the British Antarctic Survey and other teams, wonderful new discoveries are being made underwater as well, including the hot smoker vents and the many seamounts across many of the territories as well. So it's a very exciting time, and new species continue to be found in some very exciting and interesting ways and places. I'm not just trying to do all the positive stories. Of course, the territories do have some conservation concerns across many of the territories, whether it be lionfish in the Caribbean to overfishing. For example, these conch shells, these queen conchs in the Caribbean, in the British Virgin Islands, which obviously have been caught in such numbers that they form entire islands of conchs, which is pretty incredible. But hopefully this book and this DVD, which we've created in partnership with the Friends of the British Overseas Territories, will help showcase some of those conservation stories and help support the amazing work that so many incredible conservationists are undertaking. And that's the most important story of the overseas territories. Time and time again, even where there have been serious impacts, we see time and time again the territories show great examples about how it's not too late, how we can act now and change things. And that's by far the most important message. So anyway, if you like this, the book, by the way, I'm sending to all of the people that so kindly sent text and images and footage and so forth. But for everyone else, Fotbot is selling it. All the proceeds help Fotbot, and the profits go to Fotbot. So if you'd like a copy, you can buy one from Friends of the British Overseas Territories, and it supports the incredible work that the Fotbot team do. So that's really great. There's a 200-page book covering each of the territories in lots of detail, showcasing all the wonderful marine treasures that they've got. And it really is amazing to see what wildlife they've got, and a DVD set. And my last little bit before I pass over for the film, just of interest, in case it's of interest, I have to say, so the Friends of the British Overseas Territories has worked together with the Don Hanson Charitable Foundation, and we together has enabled the creation of 20,000 of these boxes. We're shipping them to one of each of 20,000 primary schools, and they contain the book and the DVD as well. It's been 9 months of solid work. It's been serious work, but thanks to the wonderful work of the Friends of the British Overseas Territories and the Don Hanson Charitable Foundation, this is going to every single school across each and every one of the overseas territories. And yeah, over 19,000 schools here in the UK as well, so 20,000 total. And that's about 7.5 million children at those schools. So that's a little box, a shot of it. This is the warehouse every single day and night at the moment, basically. I'm packing the boxes with 10 people and shipping them out. So just wanted to big up Friends of the British Overseas Territories and the Don Hanson Charitable Foundation for making the 2020 Hanson Box project possible. So that's my quick preamble and bit of an overview. I'll hand over back to the Fotbot team to play the film, and then I'm on standby at the end for any questions and answers, and I really hope you enjoy it.
Super. Thank you very much, Joe.
Pleasure.
So on that basis, I will start the video.
Wonderful.
Most people think of the United Kingdom as an archipelago of islands in Europe, comprising the nations of England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. But there's a secret side to the UK that few fully appreciate. 14 UK overseas territories are scattered across the globe. These archipelagos and peninsulas are Britain's treasure islands. Their wealth is the incredible biodiversity that they hold. From rainforests to deserts to glaciers, they're home to every major habitat on Earth, as well as over 1,000 unique terrestrial species that occur nowhere else on the planet. In total, more than 95% of the UK's biodiversity is found on the country's overseas territories. The diversity of wildlife on land is impressive, but each of the UK overseas territories is surrounded by vast tracts of waters, home to diverse marine ecosystems. From tropical reefs to frigid Antarctic seas, temperate kelp forests, to the depths of the ocean floor. The coastal waters of many of the UK overseas territories are key breeding grounds for marine life, and they are of critical importance for the survival of many threatened species. Through the UK overseas territories, the UK is responsible for the 5th largest ocean estate in the world. It's the only country on the planet with waters in all 7 seas. The North Atlantic and Caribbean are home to the greatest number of UK overseas territories. Bermuda, the Turks and Caicos Islands, Anguilla, Montserrat, the British Virgin Islands, and the Cayman Islands. These tropical waters are home to diverse reefs filled with sponges and corals. The shapes, nooks, and crannies of the reefs provide varied habitats for marine life. Although some of the reef's residents perhaps don't always choose the most effective of places to hide. The reefs provide abundant food. A hungry hawksbill turtle is looking for a meal. Its sharp beak-like jaws enables it to scrape sponges and other morsels from the reef. The diversity of fish life in the waters of the Caribbean UK overseas territories is astounding. A pair of porcupine fish are also looking for food, while stingrays glide over the sand, sensing for buried mollusks. The waters of the Cayman Islands are of particular importance for the Nassau grouper, one of the largest species of reef fish in the Caribbean. Every year, thousands of groupers swim together to congregate at breeding sites. The groupers swim from kilometers away. No one yet knows how the groupers know where to meet or when, but somehow they synchronize their movements and come together. Under the light of the moon, immense numbers congregate. Once thousands of groupers have collected together, suddenly a spawning female races upwards towards the surface of the water. She is followed by several males that fertilize the eggs she releases. The ritual repeats through the night as countless millions of grouper eggs are released. Grouper breeding aggregation sites like this one were once widespread across the Caribbean, but as soon as each site was found, the fish were immediately targeted by fishermen. Catching the concentrated spawning groupers was easier than shooting fish in a barrel. So many groupers could be caught so quickly that often the fish rotted on the docks before they could be sold, and most of the region's breeding sites have since been wiped out. In 2001, this breeding site was discovered in the waters of the Cayman Islands. Just like most of the other grouper breeding sites, it too was targeted by fishermen. But the Cayman Islands government quickly protected it during the spawning months. The Grouper Moon project has monitored the site and recorded a rise in numbers from 1,200 fish in 2009 to over 8,000 in 2020. This dramatic spectacle not only attracts divers from across the world to the Cayman Islands, but this protected grouper breeding site may now help to replenish the grouper population across the wider region. As the underwater menace stalks these reefs. Non-native lionfish, armed with venomous spines. No one knows for sure how they reached the Caribbean. Perhaps as pets released into the sea, or as spawn transported in the bilges of ships. But lionfish numbers have exploded as few native predators can eat them. Lionfish devastate populations of small native reef fish, and in some areas, they represent over 80% of all fish locally present. Divers across the Caribbean UK overseas territories are fighting back and systematically cull the lionfish in an attempt to save the native species. The meat of the hunted lionfish is sold in supermarkets. Every lionfish consumed is one less on the reefs eating native marine life, and also one less native fish that has to be caught by fishermen for the plate. Across the Caribbean, the meat of queen conchs has been prized for centuries. The shores of Anegada in the British Virgin Islands are home to entire islands made of conch shells. These have accumulated over centuries, partly as a result of overfishing. Sadly, the queen conch population has declined across much of the Caribbean in recent years. But more stringent monitoring efforts are allowing the stocks to rebuild one.
Everyone to pause just to ask if you could all please put yourselves on mute if you are watching this video, just so we can only hear the sound of the video. Thank you very much.
Once more, which is good for the local fishermen as well as the conchs. Ascension Island is a UK overseas territory located in the warm waters of the South Atlantic. It's a barren volcanic island, home to vast seabird populations that depend upon the territory's waters for food and the island's slopes to breed. The large bird colonies can only survive here because of the wealth of fish in Ascension's waters. An immense marine protected area was recently set up around Ascension Island. The new reserve covers over 440,000 square kilometers of waters and protects the territory's diverse marine life. For a few weeks each year, the seabirds are joined by thousands of green sea turtles, which swim to the island to lay their eggs. It's the second largest nesting site for this endangered species in the entire Atlantic, with around 25,000 nests dug on Ascension's beaches each year. As the sun sets, the turtles clamber on shore and dig their nests in the dark of night. The next morning, the last of the turtles return back to the sea, along with hatchlings from the first nests of the season. The parched volcanic landscape of Ascension Island might not seem like an obvious place for aquatic life. But even here, aquatic life flourishes in a few places. These two tiny pools, set in the lava flows of the island, are miniature worlds of unique life. Several species of endemic shrimps are found here and nowhere else on Earth. Some of the shrimps graze algae, while other species of shrimps prey on the grazers. This ecosystem of life is fully contained within these tiny pools, oblivious to the rest of the world. Moving further south, the UK overseas territories of Tristan da Cunha, the Falkland Islands, and South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands occupy colder temperate and subpolar waters. The islands here are fringed with kelp forests. The kelp can grow really quickly, up to 60 centimeters a day, and individual fronds may be up to 45 meters long. These underwater forests are rich with marine life and serve as important nursery areas.
Hello?
Oh, I seem to be having an issue. I think Lucia is just investigating. Apologies, everyone.
Sorry about that technical blip, everyone. I'm going to jump back to the video. I hope you can all hear me. I'm
Yep.
going to share the video again.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, sorry. Let's see if that works now. Right. Okay.
Curious of
Please
divers
let me know if you
as
cannot
we
hear
Yes.
are of them,
It's back.
and
Thank
one
you.
explores a camera lens, perhaps attracted by its own reflection. Further south still, the British Antarctic Territory is a slice of the white continent dominated by ice. Ice sheets and glaciers reach the waters and carve off as icebergs. The ice pounds the seabed of the shallows and scours the sea floor. Giant icebergs may be kilometers in size and drift through these frigid waters like floating islands. They create an entrancing world of ice, at first glance, perhaps seemingly sterile. But the ice actually holds an incredible secret. Every winter, the sub-zero temperatures causes the sea to freeze. The continent of Antarctica effectively doubles in size as the sea surface becomes covered with sea ice. The floating ice forms important habitats for many species of seals. But perhaps more importantly, over winter and spring, algae and phytoplankton grow within the ice itself and in the less salty surface water as the sea ice melts. The release of countless tons of algae, phytoplankton and nutrients causes an explosion of underwater life, as if fed by fish food from above. Divers from the British Antarctic Survey's Rothera Research Station regularly survey and study the marine life underneath the ice. Once a hole in the ice is cut, the divers are ready for a dip. In they go. And diving here is like journeying to another world. The divers are tethered with ropes, for if they lost their way back to the entrance hole, there would be no returning back to the surface. A mistake would be lethal. Compared to the white icy surface above, life is astonishingly diverse on the seabed, with starfish, sea urchins, anemones, and several species of fish. New species continue to be discovered in these southern waters. Some marine biologists estimate that over 17,000 different types of organism may live on the Antarctic continental shelf alone. We're also only beginning to realize how slowly life can take place down here. Many species of marine invertebrates are now known to live for centuries. And some species of Antarctic glass sponges are believed to live for up to 15,000 years. With the icy sojourn complete, the divers return safely back to the surface. The vast concentrations of marine life in the waters of the southern UK overseas territories support unimaginable concentrations of marine mammals and seabirds. Millions of seals and penguins breed on the shores of South Georgia, the South Sandwich Islands, and the Falkland Islands each year. On South Georgia alone, it's estimated that over 4 million fur seals rear their young each year. Massive elephant seals battle for control of the beaches and rest for a few weeks ashore during the summer season. Colonies of hundreds of thousands of king penguins cover the coastal flats and form moving seas of bodies. Each pair nurtures their own chick and takes it in turn to hunt for fish to feed to their offspring. The Falkland Islands are home to large concentrations of gentoo penguins, which scamper ashore clumsily. But under the waves, they transform and fly through the water with the grace of acrobats. It can be difficult to remember that these are underwater birds. The Falkland Islands are also home to the world's largest colonies of black-browed albatrosses. Tens of thousands of pairs nest together at several sites around the archipelago to rear their young. But back offshore, the largest animals ever to exist roam the waters of the Southern Ocean. The bounty of krill draws many species of the great baleen whales. This incredible abundance of marine life did not go unnoticed. In the early 20th century, vast whaling stations were set up across South Georgia to hunt and process the great whales. For over 6 decades, up to 3,000 men at a time worked on these stations with one goal: to process the great whales into oil, meat, fertilizer, and countless other products. Tens of thousands of whales were hunted from the ocean with devastating results. The whale populations soon crashed. The last whaling station on South Georgia closed in 1966, but these vast tanks still drip with the oil that the whalers sought.
Very sorry about this disturbance, everyone. I'm having quite a number of technical difficulties this evening, so I will hopefully restart the video again, but just advance apologies for this second blip that we've had. Right, I'll broadcast again. Apologies about this.
To reproduce sustainably. The biggest animal that ever existed could have slipped into extinction. Just imagine if these bones were all we had to show our children of the largest animals that ever evolved on Earth. But whaling did end just in time, simply because there were too few whales left in the waters for the industry to be profitable. Five decades on, All whales are now fully protected in the waters of all UK overseas territories, and their numbers are exploding back. Humpbacks are feeding in the waters around South Georgia once more. And 2020 saw record numbers of blue whales. Hope is restored. Conservation is about what we still have, not what we have lost. And the waters of the UK overseas territories show time and time again that populations of species can recover if given the chance. It's not too late. We can pull many species back from the brink of extinction if we care enough to act now. As we better appreciate and continue to explore more of Britain's distant seas, incredible discoveries continue to be made. A British Antarctic Survey remote-operated vehicle descends from the surface into the waters around the South Sandwich Islands. The underwater world here has only ever been glimpsed on a few previous occasions. As the ROV submerges, it encounters the tentacles of a 7-meter-long jellyfish. Then, out of the darkness, active geothermal vents emerge, an alien world few have ever seen before. The ROV discovers dense groups of peltasterid snails adapted to the extreme conditions. And nearby, large numbers of yeti crabs. These strange crustaceans are covered with silky strands that appear to cultivate symbiotic bacteria. They spend their adult lives clinging to the rocks, feeding off bacteria.
Sorry, just to remind any attendees who haven't yet muted themselves, please could you mute yourselves? Thank you very much.
And scavenging any morsels of food that they can find. Nearby, the ROV finds an active hot smoker. This vent billows superheated water rich with minerals that fuels this miniature ecosystem isolated in the darkness of the waters of the South Atlantic. The British Antarctic Survey researchers collect samples, and the rover begins to return to the surface. What other finds might await discovery in these little-known waters? At warmer latitudes, the British Indian Ocean Territory is the only UK overseas territory in the Indian Ocean. The 5 atolls that make up the territory are scattered over 600,000 square kilometers of tropical seas. Each atoll is a gigantic ring of coral, punctuated with small islands. But the shallows across the archipelago are home to at least 4,000 square kilometers of coral reefs. These are the largest expanses of coral reefs in all of the UK overseas territories. At least 300 species of corals have been recorded from the territory, and they form exquisite underwater coral gardens. The coral grows in a myriad of shapes and forms, and it accumulates to form the islands that make up the territory. Virtually the entire land surface of the British Indian Ocean Territory exists because of the slow growth of the coral reefs over tens of thousands of years. At least one species of coral, the Chagos brain coral, occurs nowhere else on Earth. The coral itself forms the basis of much of the food chain parrotfish use their powerful beak-like jaws to scrape the coral polyps from the hard, stony coral growths. Parrotfish excrete much of the sand that washes ashore to form the beaches around the islands. The total number of fish species that occur in the waters of the territory is still not known, but at least 800 types have been recorded to date, including around a quarter of all reef fish species known on Earth. The colors of the reef fish here are as dazzling as a rainbow, and several are found nowhere else, including the Chagos anemone fish, which hides from predators among the stinging tentacles of an anemone, against whose stings it's immune. On shore, no mammals, amphibians, or large reptiles are native. So these islands are ruled by land crabs and birds. Countless land hermit crabs rummage through the vegetation, scavenging whatever they can find. But a much larger invertebrate rules here: the coconut crab, the largest terrestrial arthropod alive today, with a leg span that can reach 90 centimeters across. These gigantic relatives of hermit crabs are so called because they can break open fallen coconuts with their powerful claws. This species is endangered throughout most of its range across the Indian and Pacific Oceans because it's been hunted intensively for its meat. But here on the British Indian Ocean territory, one of the world's largest populations remains intact. All land crabs are tied to the sea. While adults can't breathe underwater, they return to the shore to drink and to release their eggs. The islands of the British Indian Ocean territory are filled with seabird colonies, which also depend on the waters of the territory for their food. These bird colonies are now strictly protected, and virtually the entire area of the waters of
Hi everyone, I hope you can all hear me. I'm very sorry about the technical problems I've had this evening. I think unfortunately, due to the issues that I've had, I'm going to stop it there, and I suppose encourage you all, if you'd like to see the rest, then please do buy the DVD. I hope that sort of gave you all a good flavour of interest of what the DVD contains. Stuart, I apologise for the difficulties we have had. I'm going to pass over to you if you have any comments. If not, I will check if we have any questions in the chat.
Sure. Pleasure. So I'll share my screen again. So thank you all very much. Sorry, there's a few issues playing it, but I hope you enjoyed seeing a little bit of it, of the Britain's Distant Seas video. I just wanted to start with and again just repeat a massive thank you to everyone that's contributed the wonderful footage that so many people have so kindly contributed to make this possible, and to send it to the 20,000 schools that we are. And I guess just to underline another time, the main message from all of this is how it's not too late. How the territories show time and time again, whether it be the whale story you just heard a second ago during the film, and countless other examples, that the territories, the most important thing they show us is that it's not too late, that we can save species if we care enough to act and bring them back from the brink of extinction. So I think we missed the last 5 or 10 minutes there due to the technical glitches, but we saw most of it. So hopefully that offers a bit of a flavor. if anyone has any questions at all, it would be a pleasure to answer any. Are there any questions in the comment sections at all?
Well, we have one from someone from the FOTBOC committee asking, is the marine biodiversity situation improving or deteriorating? How does this differ across the OTs?
Well, that's a very, very good question. Every single territory, of course, is wildly different because they're literally scattered across all corners of the world and in very, very different degrees of impact and different lengths of time to which they've been impacted as well, of course. Many of the territories, as you may know from previous lectures and from the books and so forth, that many of the territories actually have some of the earliest conservation laws. Bermuda has one of the earliest conservation laws of all, which actually afflicts one of the seabirds, the storm petrel called the cahau. Other territories, of course, have different levels of protection. A wonderful development of the last few decades, or last few years really, has been the establishment of many enormous marine reserves, partly through the result of the Blue Belt policy of the UK government. And well, just to name a few of them, the Ascension Marine Reserve, which covers over 440,000 square kilometres. The British Indian Ocean Territory Marine Reserve, the Chagos Reserve, that covers well over 800,000 square kilometres, and the Pitcairn one likewise. These are enormous tracts of waters, vast areas. So some incredible areas are now being conserved and really, really making a benchmark for other countries to follow suit. And there's been some incredible stories recently, as you heard actually in that film, the return of really large numbers of blue whales around South Georgia, which the wonderful British Antarctic Survey team have obviously been documenting in the last year. That's such an incredible story and such a wonderful story to relay, because for so many years, and so it was so catastrophic, the whaling industry on the whale populations. Many cetaceans were decimated, and as you heard in the story, some people believe that the blue whales really did become, or at least that population, the Southern Ocean population, came within a whisker from extinction. So it's wonderful to hear that recovery of that population. So each one is different. There are some very, very grave threats across many of the territories, not least invasive species. Just as you might remember from the previous lectures about the terrestrial biodiversity, and the cats, the rats, many other species that are wiping out or have already wiped out, particularly seabirds and many different terrestrial animals across many of the territories. Well, the same is exactly true underwater too. Many underwater invasive species are affecting the marine biota, the marine ecosystems, not least the lionfish out in the Caribbean, as you saw in that film, but many other species as well across the overseas territories. The only exception, and I believe this is still true, Professor Charles Shepherd told me this just last year, so I believe it's still true. The British Indian Ocean Territory is one of the only waters in the world where there are no invasive species. And that is an extraordinary accomplishment. As far as I'm not aware of anywhere else where that can be said. So that's a pretty amazing fact that the waters of the Chagos Archipelago, the British Indian Ocean Territory, from an invasive species point of view, there aren't any, which is incredible. But other ones to some extent, to differing extents, have been impacted. Although I didn't put it in the film or in the book, the story that I personally love most of all across all of the territories is actually on Gibraltar, and it concerns the Mediterranean ribbed limpet. And considering how it's a marine species, I guess it's appropriate here. So on Gibraltar, there's a small population of a limpet called the Mediterranean ribbed limpet. Let's be honest, limpets aren't exactly the most charismatic of animals, but that only underscores how impressive the efforts of the conservationists on Gibraltar were. And basically, the Mediterranean ribbed limpet has been wiped out across most of its range across the Mediterranean. One of its last very, very few last strongholds is on Gibraltar. And a new marina was being developed on Gibraltar. And it would easy to say, oh, who cares about the limpet? It's just a boring little mollusk. You know, no one really cares about limpets. No one's going to miss it if it disappears. But the conservationists on Gibraltar went to extraordinary lengths. They lifted up rocks, because you can't just scrape off a limpet. They have it's called a home scar, where they are fixed to the rocks. And if you just pull them off and detach them, they can't seal back onto the rocks. So when it's low tide, they just die. So it's not as simple as just scraping off the rocks and chucking them on more rocks. It doesn't work like that. So the conservationists on Gibraltar lifted up entire boulders, put them on trucks, but they couldn't just wheel around the trucks and take them to a different part of the coast. The vibrations would again cause the limpets to fall off. So they put mattresses in the trucks, put the rocks on the trucks, and then moved them to their new location, and even positioned them. They had to be positioned in the exact direction, angling the sun, and the same level above seawater. So the reason why I love that story so much is kind of the contrast, the fact that, yeah, okay, it's only a limpet. Let's be honest, the world's not going to stop if it goes extinct. Probably no one, very few people will really care. But the conservationists in Gibraltar made the point that that's precisely why we should care. The reason why we should care so much is because even though this animal is so inconspicuous, and let's be honest, not exactly spectacular, that doesn't in any way degrade it to its value or its importance. And if they were to allow it to go extinct, the world would be poorer for that. So yeah, just wanted to really emphasize that little story there, because that's the stories of the territories in a microcosm. And what we've seen again and again and again and again, whether it be the sea turtles in Ascension Island that were virtually wiped out 100 years ago and have now exploded back into incredible numbers, thousands upon thousands back again, or whether it be many of the seabird islands across many of the territories, or whether it be South Georgia and the heroic efforts that have been made there, the world's largest efforts to eradicate rodents and reindeer and so forth, invasive species on that island, to help protect the seabird colonies. Again and again and again, we see these amazing efforts by conservationists, and yeah, just incredible results. So I guess to answer that question, there's been a lot of impact across the territories to differing extents depending upon each territory. But the more important message is that in many cases we can change things. It's not too late. We can reverse impacts and save species and bring things back from the brink of extinction, like the Mediterranean ribbon limpet, for example, and many others. And this work is continuing, and it's vitally important that it does. Sadly, my understanding was that an effort was going to be undertaken this year on Gough Island, which is in the Tristan da Cunha group, which is basically one of the most important temperate seabird islands on the entire planet. I was very, very fortunate to go there when I visited Tristan da Cunha, and it has over 100 million seabirds on that one island. And again, my point earlier at the start of this talk about many of the territories being tiny specks of land, but significant for entire hemispheres, literally hemispheres of wildlife, that absolutely stands with Gough Island. In fact, that's probably one of the best examples with South Georgia of a hemispheric importance of the territories. And yeah, unfortunately, you might have heard of the monster mice in one of the last talks I did that were introduced onto the island, little house mice that have evolved, and literally evolved. That's the correct use of the word in that context. It's often misused, but that is the correct terminology to use here. In the last 100 years, they've transformed into these 30-centimeter monster mice. And my understanding was that effort was going to take place this year, but it's been put back because of COVID. So many, many exciting projects are taking place, or will be continuing to take place. And that work is vitally important. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Stuart.
Cool.
That was very helpful and insightful. So we have another question in the chat bar. It says, do you believe that the fact whales have been effectively saved from extinction gives hope and a model to save future fished marine species?
Definitely. So, I mean, of course, there are still many, many, many threats facing many cetacean species, many whale and dolphin species. And sadly, just within the last few decades, several species of cetaceans have actually become extinct, including the Yangtze River dolphin. The fact that many of the whales and dolphins in the Southern Ocean are returning, partly thanks to the moratorium and obviously the whale sanctuary and the protection of whales and dolphins in all of the waters of all of the UK overseas territories. That is an incredible accomplishment, and one that everyone connected to that story should be immensely proud of, because you just have to walk into the whaling stations of South Georgia. And I'm not criticizing it, it's a different time. You can't judge the past by today's standards. I'm absolutely not criticizing the whaling. I actually interviewed several of the whalers. Wonderful man called Jimmy in the Falkland Islands. There's a video on YouTube if you want to see it. And the stories were fascinating. And I'm not for a second judging the whaling operations. It was a completely different time. But anyway, it happened. Thousands and thousands of whales were processed and killed, sadly. And many of the species were seriously depleted and seriously brought to their knees. The fact that now they're recovering is just incredible. And yes, it absolutely serves as a model for other large pelagic fish species, in particular large predatory fish like tuna, for example. This year I sailed around the UK and we saw bluefin tuna near the Scilly Isles. They had more or less been extirpated, more or less been wiped out from UK waters. I mean, by UK waters, I'm talking the British Isles. And so the fact that they're coming back again is another example. But if we give nature a chance and allow it to recover, it can. So you've got to remember that the world is a dynamic place. This isn't for a second to reduce the importance of conservation work. Exactly the opposite. But my point is that the world is a very dynamic place, and if we give nature the opportunity, if we rebalance things, if we help, for example, invasive species, if we remove invasive species, native plant and animal species, if it's caught in time, can absolutely recover, and often spectacularly. And the best example I know of that, which I was very, very honoured to be to see firsthand, was on Ascension Island. By complete coincidence, when I was filming there, the very first pair of Ascension frigate birds came back to nest on the mainland. They had been isolated on a tiny little island called Bosun Bird Island. And the conservationists at that time had wiped out all of the feral cats, which had absolutely annihilated the seabirds on the mainland. They literally wiped out every species except one, which is migratory, so they can't ever wipe it out. It leaves, then cats, rats, and mice starve, and then they come back. So it's cyclic, so they could never quite wipe out the sooty terns. But all of the other species have been pretty much wiped out on the mainland of Ascension. And the Ascension frigate birds survived on one tiny little island off the coast called Bosun Bird Island. And when I first went to Ascension, the conservationists with the RSPB were actually putting plastic frigate birds on the mainland to attract the frigate birds back from Bosun Bird Island. And I went the next year down to the Falklands, and they very kindly emailed and said, you've got to stop back on the way back. And when we landed, when we got back to Ascension Island, they took me out to a cliff, and on the very edge of the cliff was the very first pair of Ascension frigate birds with a fluffy little chick. And that was the first one for about 180 years that had been on the mainland since cats, rats, and mice had wiped the species out from the mainland. So again, it just my point is that, yeah, the whale story is an incredibly positive story. Of course, there's still a way to go for all of these species, and that's not to say that they're still not vulnerable. Many cetaceans still remain massively threatened by lots of different factors, whether it be from plastics and nets and lots of different impacts. And of course, many whales and dolphins are still hunted to this very day. Not the blue whales, thankfully, but many other species are. and not in the Southern Ocean, thankfully, as far as I'm aware. There's a moratorium, although I know Japan was advocating challenging that recently. But it is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful accomplishment, and everyone connected to that, the British Antarctic Survey team, and the governments and the conservationists across South Georgia and the British Antarctic Territory should be really proud, because that is a wonderful development. And yeah, I was so happy. It's on the BBC. If anyone wants to see, there was several posts about a year ago, and they're very, very, very wonderful to read and interesting to read. So if you want to know more about that, just type in Blue Whale South Georgia on Google and it'll come up. And the wonderful Dr. Martin Collins was spearheaded that. And so if you type his name in, you should find those pieces and articles. They're very good and interesting, and it's lovely to read a positive story now and then as well. So I strongly recommend reading those. Any other questions at all?
That's fascinating. Thank you very much. Another question we have is, how is the protection of the UK overseas territory waters protected? So is it coordinated locally, or is there a central body?
Well, there's many different levels of protection. It's not as simple just to say, oh yeah, that block is protected. Some are absolute no-take zones. Some have to be compromised, because you have to remember it's very, very sensitive and very, very, very politically delicate. It's not a matter of the UK government coming and saying, yep, that's water, that water there, no one can fish in. Most of the territories are sovereign entities. They're self-governing states in their own right under UK sovereignty. So it's actually a decision locally in each territory. Every territory is a little bit different, but in many cases, and most cases, it's a decision undertaken locally in each overseas territory, supported by the UK. And each one differs in protection, in levels of protection. If you take, for example, the Pitcairn Islands, the Pitcairn Island government wonderfully agreed to conserve basically the entire waters of the territory, except a very small, I forget exactly, but a couple of kilometre area around the island, Pitcairn Island. Basically, the entire remaining stretches of the waters are conserved now, which is amazing. But fisheries are allowed very close to shore to support the community, and that's often the cases with many of the territories, and understandably and rightly so. It's a bit of a balance between, of course, absolutely supporting sustainable fisheries by the communities on each territory, and let's be honest, it's their home, it's their waters, they have that right, but also protecting large areas, and particularly from enormous commercial trawlers that honestly often traditionally were giving very little back anyway to the territory, some of the territories. So I think it's a really, really good step. And many of the territories, of course, are finding there's greater value in conserving, and this is genuinely, this isn't just making an argument for conservation, but many of them are genuinely finding that there is far, far greater value in conserving the waters and developing alternative industries, much more high value industries than just fisheries. So for example, particularly in the Caribbean, really high-end diving is exploding, particularly in the Cayman Islands. And as you saw in the film, the enormous aggregations of groupers. I mean, this is just so special. This is so few sites like this survive. And the fact that the group of aggregation that you saw of Little Cayman, that was conserved almost immediately. Okay, it was impacted when it was first found a little bit. It was hunted, and that some groupers were caught, but very, very quickly, the Cayman Islands government stamped down and said, yep, this is going to be strongly protected. And with the wonderful Grouper Moon project, and conservation is connected to that, yeah, this enormous aggregation site with thousands of groupers is continuing. And you can just imagine, like you saw in that film, how easy it would be to catch those groupers. In the past, when grouper aggregations were found, it was literally like shooting fish in a barrel, like literally, thousands of groupers would swarm together. If you chucked a massive net over, you could catch hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, in a single swoop. And as you saw in the film, yeah, often in other parts of the Caribbean, when that happened, so many fish were caught that they would just rot on the dockside. No one could eat that many fish. No one could freeze that many fish. No one could sell or export that number of fish. So half of them just rotted. And then those sites vanished and gone. And again, remember my point about pinpricks that can impact vast areas. And that's especially true with breeding sites, not just over on land, but also underwater as well. And that's absolutely true with the groupers. And by wiping out the grouper sites, yeah, it impacts hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of square kilometers of reefs, and has big impacts then on the ecosystem. So by conserving those sites, the Cayman Islands government did something incredibly smart. They've not only conserved their entire ecosystem, the ecosystem in that sense, but they've allowed an incredible high-end tourism diving market to explode, and it's doing really, really well. And there's so many dive operators, and it's a really high-value tourist, really, really high-value industry. And someone did the calculations, and the value of keeping a grouper alive in the water massively, massively outweighs the value of just killing it, selling it for $10 per steak on a plate, and then it's gone. So yeah, coming back to the question, the whale story and the amazing return of those blue whales at South Georgia gives hope for so many other elements of marine conservation across the territories. And whaling in the Southern Ocean has been replaced today with whale watching. I'm sure you guys know, okay, maybe not this year, but normally how many cruise ships go down to the Southern Ocean. And in a way that's sort of replaced the whaling operations that existed 50, 60, 70 years ago. And as you saw in that film, it's not only within living memory, but the whale oil still drips. And I've literally seen this myself and filmed it. Whale oil literally still drips from the giant tanks in the whaling stations at Grytviken. I literally filmed this myself. There's a pipe that comes out one of the tanks, and it's still dripping from it. So it's really, really poignant to reflect on just that contrast within just a few decades, and the hope for the future that extends right the way across all of the overseas territories. Cool. Any other questions at all?
It's fascinating how you put examples from so many different UK overseas territories. That really helps bring your examples alive. I suppose the last question for me really is, how long has this book and DVD been in the making now that we're at the moment of release?
Well, to be honest, it's been about a year. As I mentioned before, we watched part of it. It was really a jigsaw puzzle, and I have to say an enormous thank you again to everyone that was so kind as to contribute footage, because I couldn't make this on my own. I don't think anyone could. It's so, filming underwater and getting underwater footage is so much harder and more expensive and more time consuming than on land, which already can be really hard anyway. But I was so honored and so grateful that so many kind people from so many different areas, from pretty much all of the territories, scattered all different parts of the world, different people have been so kind in contributing images and text for the book, and the wonderful footage that you've just seen in the film. So an enormous thank you again to everyone. So to answer your question, yeah, it's been about a year of thinking, a few months like really developing and writing and storyboarding and scripting. But I really hope it goes to help drive forward the appreciation, not just of the territories, but of their amazing underwater ecosystems. Because I have to say, like, I have to be honest, I absolutely overlooked the importance of them when I went to all of the territories. I went to all of them to film for a BBC series, and I was thinking about the wildlife on land, not the wildlife so much underwater. We dived at 4 of them, I think, from memory. But yeah, I'm ashamed at how little attention I paid to the underwater diversity, which is in many ways greater, much greater than the terrestrial biodiversity. but kind of obviously less from a terrestrial mammal's point of view, less conspicuous and less easy to observe. But that just underlines and really underscores just how grateful I am to everyone that's so kindly made this possible. And again, it is a very exciting time for marine conservation. There's many other territories, many other reserves or different levels of protection are in the pipeline on many of the other territories. So it's a really, really exciting time for conservationists. And the most important thing is I hope this helps helps support efforts that are being undertaken. And if it supports that in any way, then I'll be happy, because the work that's being undertaken by so many incredible people across the territories, incredible conservationists, incredible people on the territories as well, it is just inspiring. And honestly and truly, it can have a global impact by saving different animal populations or seabird populations in the territories. Like I was saying many times now, it can have hemispheric importance. By saving the seabirds on Gough Island, you impact not just the ecosystem on that tiny pinprick of land, but the ecosystem for 2,000 kilometers in all direction, in a giant circle, pretty much from South Africa to South America. And that goes again and again and again and again on many of the other territories. And it's no exaggeration to say that some of the territories are unique. For example, the British Indian Ocean Territory, the Chagos Archipelago, which you may know, it has roughly 55 islands. Some of them are tiny and submerged, so you'll see different numbers, but approximately 55 islands, only one of which is inhabited. That's a military base. The others were settled but are not now, and they're wild. They're to different extents being reclaimed by wildlife or have the natural ecosystems in place, which is absolutely unprecedented in the Indian Ocean. On several of the Chagos Islands, there's the original hardwood forests that did occur, and nowhere else, literally nowhere else in the Indian Ocean do you have that. And the Chagos, for example, those 55 islands, that necklace of beautiful coral atolls and coral islands scattered in the middle of the Indian Ocean, there's nowhere like it, literally anywhere in the tropics. There's no massive archipelago of islands like that that's uninhabited, except one island, basically uninhabited and wild. There's just no comparison to it. There's no equivalent to it. So it's an incredibly important benchmark that hopefully in the future, and obviously, with respect to climate change, to so many other factors taking place, it's very important to have those benchmarks so we can see our impact and just see, the degradation that's occurring in other parts of the world, and what it could be like if we make the effort to save other parts of the world and restore them. So that's also an incredibly important element of the overseas territories. If the UK can do a good job, and genuinely, it really is in many cases doing an amazing world-class job of restoring these ecosystems. And okay, there's a lot of work still to do. There's a lot of different things we can get better. There's a lot of new reserves we can set up. There's a lot of species we still need to pull back from the brink of extinction. But it's no exaggeration to say that on many of the territories, world-class conservation work is being done that honestly raises the bar for again, South Georgia, the world's largest rodent eradication program, the biggest one on the planet. Was already is having great results, and many of the species of seabirds are coming back in really, really good numbers. So yeah, it's just a great accomplishment for our country, and one that can carry the flag and lead the charge that hopefully other countries will follow. And that is working. America and France and others didn't want to be outdone after the Chagos Reserve was set up, and they surpassed the Chagos Reserve. America did an enormous one near Hawaii. France is in the process of setting up several more and has set up several as well. And so, yeah, it really matters. This isn't just conservation talk. being positive about something. This really, 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 really matters for the future of our planet and the future of biodiversity. So we really should be proud. There is still a lot more work to do, but I really, really hope that this little DVD and book that's going out to 20,000 schools, 7.5 million children, I hope it can help engage that with a new audience and build as much support as possible for the wonderful conservation work that's being undertaken. And I should just add my one last point, one point to reflect on, as you probably remember from the start of this talk. So remember, 20 times the biodiversity, at least, probably far more, because it's still being collected, still being surveyed and established, and in many cases discovered. Well over 20%, 20 times the biodiversity of the British Isles occurs on the overseas territories, including well over 1,000 endemic species that occur nowhere else on Earth. The number, without question, is much higher than that. I wouldn't be surprised if it's closer to 2,000, really, but whatever, at least 1,000 we know of. And new species are found every single year, and many new endemics. Yeah, 20 times that biodiversity is scattered across the UK's 14 overseas territories. But yet, the UK overseas territories get less than 2% of the UK's conservation money. So isn't that absolutely opposite to where it should be? I more than anything hope, and I'm working on quite a few different ways, and I'm trying to raise some money and doing lots of different projects to help support conservation efforts on many of the territories, because we really need to change that. We need to start treasuring these amazing, amazing parts of the UK, because they're part of the British family, they're part of our UK, our United Kingdom, and we really need to treasure them because they're so special. They really are. And the people, the wildlife, the landscapes, the history, the cultures, all of it, and the marine ecosystems, it all makes up the territories, and we need to really treasure that. The very first book I wrote on them, which is a really big fat book, was called The Britain's Treasure Islands. And the treasure here is not gold or silver, but it's the biodiversity, it's the people, it's the cultures. That's by far the most valuable thing of them. And that's why they're treasure islands. And so on that note, I'll I thank you all very, 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 very much for attending. I'm very sorry about the old technical issues on the broadcast, but anyway, hopefully you saw a fair bit of it. And a sincere thank you for everyone that's joined us tonight. And yeah, I really hope you enjoyed listening.
Thank you very much, Stuart. And just to say, we've had many thanks and congratulations in the chat bar to you from many of our attendees, particularly as well some thanks and shouts out to mentioning the ribbed limpet example.
Oh, good. I love that story.
An example on the conch shell as well.
Yes, that's wonderful. Well. That's great. Oh, fantastic.
Thank you very much for your time, Stuart. Before everyone heads off, I'll just pass over to Gus just so we can run through some of the merchandise.
Thank you very much, Lucia, and thank you very much, Stuart, for that excellent presentation and that very, very informative video. And I'm sorry that we weren't able to watch it all, but it seems like the DVD will solve that problem. So it does give me great pleasure to remind everyone that we have launched the book and the DVD now on our Fotbot shop. So it is available to purchase from now. If you are a Fotbot member, you will actually be entitled to a 10% discount if you use the code FOTBOT10. That is FOTBOT10. And it's not just the Britain's Distant Seas you can buy on the shop. You can also buy Stuart's other books, the Treasure Island book that he mentioned. There's also Britain's Distant Lands book as well. And we also have got the Fotbot 2021 calendar among various other merchandise. So if you visit the shop, have a look, and we look forward to sending the merchandise out to you.
Thank you very much.
And just to really emphasize, the profits go to Fotbot. They're a wonderful, wonderful organization. Please support them. They do great, great, great work. And yeah, we need to expand the wonderful work that FOTBOT does. So so please support them, and yeah, anything you can do, whether it's becoming a member or if you buy a DVD, it goes and helps FOTBOT. So so yeah, just really wanted to emphasize that point.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you for all your time and contribution to this.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
I suppose before wrapping up and calling it a night, I'll just remind everyone that our next upcoming event is in early December, and it's going to be a FOTBOT quiz, much like the very successful one we had back in May, but this one with a bit of a Christmas twist to it.
Oh.
So hope you'll all be able to join. There is also, there's 2 prizes up for grabs. One for being the highest scoring contender in the quiz, and also you can purchase a raffle ticket when you register, which may get you in the chance of winning a lovely bottle of Irish whiskey. So I'll leave it there. Thank you all very much for attending. And Stuart, thank you very much again for your contribution and the wonderful work that you have helped produce.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. Have a lovely day.
Thank you very much, Stuart.
Thanks. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers. Oh, cheers. Bye.
Thank you, Stuart, and the whole team. That was amazing. Thank you.